My father died when I was 10 years old, but for most of my life, I didn't know the truth about how he died. The day it happened, my mother told me he had died of a heart attack, and I believed that story for 35 years. Today, we're sitting down with the person who carried that secret for me all those years, my mom, Sandy. She's 87 years old now, and this is one of the first times we've ever talked about this story publicly on the podcast. We're going to talk about losing my dad, the silence around suicide in the 1970s, and why telling the truth matters more now than ever. Hey friends, before we dive into this week's episode, just a heads up. Our podcast talks about suicide, sexual abuse, and other trauma, and some of what you hear may be triggering, so please listen with care. This is The Survivors, real stories, raw conversations, and the truth about what it means to keep going after the hardest things. We're so glad you're here. Let's keep surviving together. So this is a really, really special and unique episode for me, for us, all of us. If you've been listening to the pod for a while, you know that my father, Jim, died by suicide when I was 10 years old. But what you may not know, or you do if you've been listening, is that most of my life I didn't know the truth about how my father died. I thought it was a heart attack. That was what my mom told me the day he passed away. And I believed that story for 35 years because I had absolutely no reason not to believe that story until I accidentally learned the truth that he had died by suicide. And I learned that about 13 years ago. And that single event, that single truth coming out has changed the course of my life. It created this podcast. It's created the book that's coming out about that story in another month or so, and all the work that I've done since then. And today we get the privilege of sitting down with the person who carried that secret all those years to protect me, my mom, Sandy. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. She's 87 years old now. I hope you don't mind me saying that. You look amazing.
No, not at all.
And yeah, she's living in Florida. And this is one of only a small handful of times that we've had a conversation like this publicly. We've been doing it a lot more lately, but not like this. And you've never been on the podcast. So we're going to talk about all the parts of our story, what it was like to lose a husband and lose a father for me, and all about the silence that suicide carried back in the 1970s and why you felt like you needed to protect me from the truth. So this is an unbelievably powerful experience for me having you on The Survivors, and you're meeting Natasha right here and now for the first time. We all were just chatting before we hit record. So I just thought we could jump in. And first of all, just say welcome. And I'm just going to say I love you right off the jump because I love you for just being so willing all this time to have these conversations and to share your experience with people. So welcome to The Survivors. And I thought it might be a nice idea before we really kind of get into the whole story, if you just talk about Dad for a second. Just talk about Daddy, and you were married for 18 years, and I'm just going to let you take it and say whatever you feel like you would want people to know about him as a man.
He was very, very special. He was a kind, gentle man. He was a wonderful father to you. He used to love to take you climbing mountains and doing various things like that, and you helped him doing things. And it was wonderful because he enjoyed it. It was a pleasure for him to do. And he was just a good guy. Everybody liked him. He was a very likable man, very warm, very friendly. He just had that way about him. Very bright man. He worked very, very hard, had more than one job, and was not a complainer. That's one thing. He was not a complainer. That's one of the reasons that things did not come to fruition right away about him, that he had a problem. And in those days, in the late 70s, you did not discuss that type of illness, quote, mental illness, suicide, off the table. Then I found out that he was really hurting. And I said, whatever you need to do, if you want to see someone, if you want to talk to someone other than me, absolutely, because we talked about everything. Our lives were the type that each one was for the other person. In other words, I could talk to him about anything. He could talk to me about anything, but he was really hurting. And at that time, I never, ever expected what happened. I just didn't. And the shock was overwhelming. And the immediate reaction for me was to protect Lisa. That was the biggest thought that I had at that moment, other than he was gone. And it was just a shock, period.
Yeah.
It was just so overwhelming. But the first thing I thought about was, this is a man who adored his daughter. They did so many things together. How can I say to her, he took his own life? He left because he wanted to, because he had to. I couldn't do that. I just couldn't do it. So there was a small note, very, very tiny note. And the note did say that he loved us, but that he could not go on. And I felt I would get rid of the note right away, because Lisa was very inquisitive. She was kind of a girl, she would go to the desk and maybe look in the drawer and check to see.
You're calling me a snoop, aren't you?
Yeah,
you're calling
probably.
me a snoop.
Sort of, kind of. And what happened, I'm so concerned at that very moment that, bright as she was, she would come across a note like that. I destroyed it. And then I decided to tell her that it was a heart attack. And that's what I did. And I have never, ever been sorry.
Let's go back for a second.
Sure.
To the beginning of that day, just to kind of set the scene of what it was like. So you mentioned a few minutes ago that Dad worked 2 jobs. So Dad was an import exporter. And we grew up in Boston, outside of Boston, and he worked in the city for an import export company, and that was his full-time job. But his family, the family business was real estate. And when Grandpa passed away, Dad took over. And so he had this full-time job in Boston doing his thing. And then he also had an equally full-time job running the family business, which was managing all of these apartment buildings for his parents and his siblings.
Right.
And that was, I think, even more all-consuming than his regular day job. Yeah. So he had been deciding to potentially go off on his own. He loved real estate. That's what he wanted to do. He had a whole business plan for developing his own business, his own real estate business. And he asked Grandma and his sister, who were kind of the administrators of the family business, if he could go ahead and get their support and go off on his own. And they said no.
Right.
They said, no, you're going to stay and you're going to do this. And is it fair to say, in your opinion, and you and I have talked a lot about this, that was something that really kind of threw him
that was the catalyst.
The edge? Yeah.
I believe. I do.
Right.
I would have helped him with anything, because I had some office knowledge, that type of thing. I could have helped him, and I did help him with certain functions that had to be done with the property in the old days. But then I could have helped him. I had a part-time job, so I could have used the rest of my time to help him, which was the plan originally. But
so he was discouraged, and that's when you mentioned also that at the very, very end of his life, he did decide to go see a therapist, which clearly was too little, too late.
Yeah.
And the day he passed away, he had stayed home that day from work, and he had a plan to meet you. You worked up the street at a nursing home as a
We
secretary.
were going to
And
meet
Dad
for
was,
lunch.
right. You were supposed to meet, and quickly take us through what that was like. You were at work. He was around the corner and down the street at home, supposed to meet you at noon.
Yes.
Noon came and went. What happened?
I had a feeling. It didn't often happen that way, but something was not right. And I said, I should go home. And the fellow that I worked with said to me, you know what? I'm going to take you home, because we were right around the corner. I always walked to work, and then it was 1, 2, and I was back. And he said, let's go. I'll just drop you off. Everything, I'm sure he said it, everything is fine. And we got in, walked in to where he was in the playroom, and we could see that he was gone.
He was gone.
This,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's exactly what George said at the time. He's gone.
Mhm.
So at that moment, of course, my world fell apart, but I was thinking of Lisa. Only child. We tried for 8 years to have her, and finally I had her after multiple tries and problems. And it was just so overwhelming that all I could think of was, how can I tell her that he left voluntarily? I couldn't do it. And that's what led up to the fact that I would keep the secret. And I felt, if ever it came to light and I was asked by her about this, I would certainly give her the truth. But if she didn't ask, I wouldn't say anything. And so you have to understand that my in-law family was very different from my family. My family, we were all very close family. So everybody knew everything that was going on, but they were for me. My in-laws, they just, for whatever reason, they just ignored us. That's the only way I could say it after everything happened. So to keep a secret was okay. And I maintained the secret as long as I could. But when you found out the truth, I was not going to lie to you. That was it. I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it again.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. And that we're going to talk about that and the secret coming out, which happened much, much, much later, decades and decades later.
Sure.
We'll talk about that in part 2 of this episode. But what was the conversation even like about suicide? Was there any conversation going around in the world about suicide?
No.
In your world?
No, except for my nephew. No. He was young, very young. He was a wonderful boy. I don't know what happened. I can suspect, and he did have help, that I know. But it wasn't to be. He wasn't to keep up with his life. It just, that's the way it was.
And he passed away. He passed away a year before Dad did.
A year before Dad did.
And that was when I actually learned about suicide. That was my first experience with a death, and it was my first experience with a suicide. And you and Dad were very honest about it. You told me as much as you could tell a 9-year-old child about it.
We were honest about it. There were people within the realm of the family that did not speak of it. It was not considered by them suicide. They did not want to talk about it as suicide, because in those days, you didn't talk about it. You really didn't. You could never sit and talk the way we're talking now. You just couldn't. And the sad part is he was a bright young kid, and he would have made a lovely young man. I know that, because I know the type of a boy that he was. But things change and people change. And that's that's what happened.
Was he a nephew on your side or
Yes,
your
my
husband's side?
yeah, my sister's boy. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's a
he lived
wonderful boy.
what
Yeah,
half a mile away. So my
yeah.
mother's
We
older
lived
sister
close
had three
by.
children, and he was the youngest.
Oh,
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
He was. And it was very, very sad because I feel it might have been prevented. But, you know, it's easy for someone on the outside to say that. And I was on the outside. So I felt awful. Uh, My family did. Oh, we felt terrible. It just
Mhm.
was sad. You know, life has a lot of struggles and you do the best you can with what you have. And you have to try to overcome certain things. It's sometimes it's easier to say goodbye than it is to say, I'm going to do something and I'm going to make a life.
Well,
Because
when someone is so burdened by
oh,
their own mental illness and they have no way of making that pain
right,
stop, and they have no way of escaping that daily loop that they're living in, the only thing they have left is control over whether they stay or
they
whether they
stay or
don't.
go.
And
That's right.
so many people make that decision. I mean, look at Natasha comes from a family of she's one of 20 kids, and
Right. Yeah.
5 of her brothers
Mm,
have been lost to suicide, and a lot of them were more recently, and living in a time when talking about your mental health was more acceptable.
right.
So I think it depends
It's a
on so many
circumstance
different.
of your life.
Well,
I think.
that's it. It's so many factors. Like, do you feel like there are people you can reach out and talk to?
Right.
Do you have the means to support your own mental health? I mean, there's so many things. There's so many
To be
things
able
at
to
play.
call a number and talk to somebody, I think is amazing and wonderful. I do. Because you need to talk to someone. You need to be able to unburden yourself because that will give you a chance to regenerate and maybe say
Mhm.
to yourself, you know, hey, I'm really a special person too. I deserve to live my life and have my family. It's just, you don't know until you're living it. And obviously, Natasha knows it. And it's very, very
Mhm.
difficult. But
Yeah,
from,
yeah. I
it's
mean,
just,
you were suddenly, so suddenly and unexpectedly, a single mom. All
oh,
of a sudden, overnight, raising a 10-year-old child after losing your husband in one of the
there was
most.
no time
uh,
to grieve. There
right,
just
I
was
know.
no time to grieve. You were my focus immediately because I remember you sat with me at the edge of the bed and you looked at me and you said, are you going to die too? And I said, someday, but not now.
Not now.
And I
Yeah.
remember you.
I remember that. I remember that.
I remember that. And, you know, it's a sad set of circumstances because we don't have all the answers.
And it's
And
so hard too as a parent when I mean, you
oh,
had knowledge that you weren't giving me, which was obviously the dad died of by suicide. But what is that like having to what I can't imagine the kind of pain you were dealing with, knowing the truth, losing your partner, having to keep a secret, and then having to talk to me. Like, Natasha, you and I were talking a little while ago about you going through something similar where
right.
you had to tell your son at the time, your kids, but your son at the time was the same age that I was learning about my father's death. And you had to have that same experience as a mother telling your children that
Yeah.
one of your siblings had died. I mean,
Oh,
what is that even like?
Well, the hardest part for me was that we had just seen Corey 48 hours before he had taken his life at my children's birthday party.
oh, no.
So, yeah. And so
Oh,
that was, the kids talk about that often, is that we had just seen him. How is that possible? Literally 48 hours prior. And not only did I have to tell them that Corey took his life, but I also had two other brothers that had taken their lives in their, 18, 20 years prior. And so that was a tremendous amount of weight to put on a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old at the time. And and then they too were very, very afraid that I was going to die too.
of
And
course. Yeah.
yeah. And then as I've had more, now I've had 5, I dare say, and they probably don't even share with me how much they're afraid that I'm going to be next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Oh,
that's such a hard and incredibly unique
it is.
situation to be in. I remember, and I've talked about this, I'm talking now from the perspective of that child, finding out that news about, in my case, my dad, and having only one parent left. Mom, you and I had a conversation just this week about how I have, and I get very emotional every time I think about this or talk about this, because I remember, like you remember those thoughts put you back to those emotions that you were feeling in that moment. And I remember that conversation sitting with you on the edge of the bed saying, "Are you going to die too?" And I remember from the day Dad died right up until today. I mean, right up, honestly, until right here and now, I have always lived with this fear of losing you. And it's such an intense, like, it's very hard for me to even talk about it right now without the emotion coming
I know.
out. But
Yeah.
it has been my single greatest fear. And I'm a grown woman. I understand life and death and have
Oh, of
experienced that in
course.
so many different ways. But I just remember that fear. So, Natasha, I totally get what your kids were
Oh,
feeling being that child who
yes.
was so terribly afraid that, well, okay, when is this going to happen to my person? When are they going to do this to themselves, or when will they be gone? And it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying feeling. Hey, it's Lisa Sugarman, co-host of The Survivors and founder of the HelpHUB. If you're listening right now and you're not okay, if you're feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or like you're carrying more than you can handle, please know you don't have to go through it alone. You can call or text 988 or chat online at 988lifeline.org to connect with trained counselors like me who are there to listen and support you in the moment. Reaching out is a brave first step, and you owe it to yourself. Because your life matters, your story matters, and help is always just 3 numbers away.
And then, I know that them watching me grieve actively, all of us grieve day in and day out, and watching me because they had never seen me like that before.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, for the first week or two, I was trying to hide my grief from them. And then I had a very dear friend tell me to stop doing that it was important for them to see me grieve, to see that it's okay to cry and then miss and be upset. And so I actually made it a point to be more open with my grief with them. And then I guess that gave them the permission to openly share their feelings. And I know for me, I didn't want to burden my children with that kind of information initially, because I know what it's like to carry a lot of trauma and grief from a very young age and be burdened with life too young.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do that, but I also knew that it was important for them to know the truth. And so for me, I wanted to ask you, Sandy, was it Lisa that you only kept that secret or was it everybody? And how did you do that?
My own family, my mother, my brothers, my sister, they knew, my sister-in-laws, they knew the situation. However, it was never brought up, never mentioned, never certainly mentioned in front of Lisa, never. However, as I say, my in-law family, when everything happened, it was just like cut off. That's it. I mean, they would, "Hi, how are you?" If we were somewhere, they were cordial. but there was never warmth. There was never warmth. And that's the one thing that my husband loved about my family. They were very loving from the day that he met them. They were that type. They were very warm. They were very loving, very caring, and we were family.
Mom, what was it like? Just kind of going back to Natasha's question, what was it like for you carrying these two narratives and really being the only one who was really holding on to these two stories that were very much in opposition of each other and worrying about slipping or worrying about
you do worry.
somehow me asking a question, or what was that like?
Since it was ongoing for so long, it kind of fades a little bit. It just becomes very natural.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes my life.
The lie became your truth the longer you carried it.
That's very true. And I think because I had a wonderful marriage, I mean, I was very grateful. Jim was a wonderful guy. What happened, it was sad for him, I feel. For me, it was no time to grieve. I had a 10-year-old. I could not do that. I couldn't have the luxury of going into my bedroom, closing the door, and crying for days on end. I just knew I couldn't do that.
Did you at night, maybe after Lisa went to sleep, would you allow yourself to grieve at all?
Rarely, only because I had friends and family that kept in touch all the time. So there was not a lagging of time where I could say, oh, I'm going to sit now and I'm going to think about all that I had, because all that I had was a daily thought for me. I was very grateful that I had a wonderful life with him. We talked all the time, and we talked about everything, everyone. We just had that kind of a marriage. You know, we were comfortable. I think that's the word, with each other.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting. This came out for me when I was over the course of being in therapy, especially in the last year or so. And Mom, this relates to you. My therapist, who my mom has gotten to know.
Oh, yeah.
So she asked me a really interesting question that no one had ever asked me, and I had certainly never thought of it myself. She asked me, who was checking in on me when I was 10 years old? And this is in the context of grieving that loss at that time actively, which it turns out neither one of us really did. Like, you and I did a lot of reminiscing. We did a lot of crying. We did a lot of, I in my own way, I've always kept a journal since I was a little kid. And so I would express things in that way, but there was no talking about it. There was certainly no therapy. There was no group. There was nobody checking in on, I'm just speaking from myself here, checking in on me, saying, how are you? I mean, it was, you were always there and always present and always actively keeping Dad very much a part of our life. But in terms of what we now know, or what I now know, like active grieving to be, which involves a lot of asking yourself questions and reflecting and really sitting in it. We didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
And I feel like you and I, honestly, especially since I mentioned early on in this episode that I have a book coming out, Surviving Finding Hope After Suicide Loss, is coming out at the end of April. And it is about Dad. It is a memoir. It's about losing him twice, once to a heart attack, once to suicide. And you're in it in so many beautiful ways. Your voice is in every chapter. And so you and I have done a lot of heavy reflecting the last year or so while I've been writing this book. And I feel like we've almost done all the grieving we didn't do then now. Do you feel that at all?
Yes, because truth has a way of doing that. And the truth came out. You, for 35 years, there was one answer, and now there's a completely different answer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And that is the perfect place, I think, to wrap this conversation. This is going to be a 2-part conversation.
Sure.
And in the second part of the conversation, we're going to talk about what it was like for you, not just to carry that secret, but what happened exactly when the truth finally came out. How did that happen? What was it like? What did it create in terms of the trajectory of my life and your life? Because that's where I feel like so much of this story really begins for me personally, is when I found out the truth and everything that happened after that. So we're going to meet right back here again next week, and we're going to have part 2 of this conversation with my mom. And until then, I just am so grateful for you to be here like this and be so open and share this. It's not an easy thing to do, and we both love and appreciate you so much for doing it.
Well,
Absolutely.
So we'll keep surviving until next week, and we'll be back to dive right back in where we left off.
absolutely.
Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the survivors community. No matter where you are in your story, you're not alone, and you're definitely not broken. Healing takes time, and it looks different for everyone. The fact that you're still here and still trying means you're already doing the hard work. If something in today's conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it too. That's how we keep these conversations going and remind each other that there's always hope.
And if you or someone you know is struggling, please remember, help is always out there. You can call or text 988 anytime to reach a trained crisis counselor like me. And for more mental health resources, tools, treatment options, and content to support your mental health, visit thehelphub.co. We're so grateful you're part of the Survivors family, and we'll be back next week with another honest conversation about life after the hardest things. Until then, take care of yourself and your people and keep surviving.